In today's fast-changing world, organizations face unprecedented complexity, uncertainty, and competition. Traditional approaches to leadership, strategy, and culture are no longer enough. To thrive, organizations must develop a deeper capacity to question, learn, and adapt. This is the promise of the inquisitive mind. Everyone agrees that curiosity, adaptability, and growth are critical in today's world of work. We celebrate them on company websites, weave them into leadership programs, and champion them in keynote speeches. Stay curious, we say, like it's a switch you can flip. But if curiosity is so universally praised, why is it so rare inside actual organizations? Why do cultures that talk about growth often punish the people who ask the most inconvenient questions? Why do discovery, innovation, and collaboration feel like things we have to fight for rather than natural parts of how we work? The truth is, curiosity threatens systems that prize control. It introduces friction into environments that reward predictability. It surfaces tensions leaders aren't ready to navigate, and it forces teams to confront the messy, non-linear realities that rigid structures can't easily absorb. Curiosity sounds simple, but in practice, it's disruptive. It asks us to listen when we would rather move fast. It demands we rethink when we would rather execute. It calls for humility in a world that often rewards certainty. That's the tension at the heart of this book. Not how to encourage curiosity in theory, but how to cultivate it in the mess of real teams, real hierarchies, real deadlines. The inquisitive mind introduces a practical framework for doing exactly that. It explores the different ways people surface insight, bridge silos, orchestrate learning, and conduct collective action inside complex systems. You'll meet four key roles: catalysts, integrators, orchestrators, and conductors, and learn how each one contributes to building a culture where curiosity doesn't just survive, but reshapes what's possible. This book is about reimagining how information moves, how decisions are made, and how people grow together inside organizations that want to thrive, not just survive. If you've ever wondered why the most valuable conversations happen after the meeting, why the best insights get stuck at the front lines, or why collaboration feels harder than it should, this book is for you. The good news is, curiosity isn't a trait, it's a system, and systems can be redesigned. Welcome to the Inquisitive Mind, a practical path from curiosity to action. This book is divided into three sections. Part A lays the foundation by exploring why curiosity, psychological safety, inclusion, adaptability, and courage are not just nice-to-have traits. They are essential capabilities for organizational survival and growth. Across these 8 chapters, we uncover the core challenges that hold organizations back and the transformational mindset shifts that leaders must embrace to unlock breakthrough performance. This section is designed for leaders and decision makers seeking a strategic understanding of what drives lasting innovation and resilience. It provides a thoughtful, evidence-based framework that redefines the role of curiosity from a soft skill to the very engine of strategy and transformation. While Part A answers the critical question of why, it stops short of prescribing how to build these capabilities in practice. The insights here create the strategic context and motivation needed to commit to change, but they intentionally leave room for the next step, embedding curiosity into everyday actions. Part B introduces the four roles that fuel an inquisitive culture: catalysts who surface hidden insights, integrators who connect scattered information, orchestrators who guide shared learning, and conductors who align curiosity with action at scale. Together, they answer the who behind meaningful discovery. Who notices what others overlook? Who brings pieces together across silos? Who keeps the larger learning journey alive inside teams? Who steers collective insight towards strategy and impact? But knowing the players isn't enough. Part C explores the system they need to operate within, a framework for managing and maturing different types of information as they move through the sense-making process. It offers an alternative to today's common tools, which often encourage posturing over clarity and fiction over evidence. Too often, organizations rely on methods like user stories, requirements lists, or project briefs that sound good, but hide critical gaps in understanding. Assumptions are written as facts. Solutions are proposed before problems are fully understood. Meetings become debates between strongly held opinions without shared language for sorting signal from noise. The inquisitive mind offers a different approach, a shared vocabulary and structured process that helps teams document what they truly know, and just as importantly, what they still need to learn. It equips leaders, product teams, researchers, and change makers with terminology they can use to clarify what type of information is on the table. Is this an observation, an opinion, or an insight? Are we proposing a hypothesis, offering a point of view, or launching an initiative? Do we have validated knowledge, or are we working from untested assumptions? This framework gives organizations a way to build more credible, evidence-based proposals, trace solutions back to real user needs, reduce rework driven by misalignment or wishful thinking, and shape meetings that value learning over posturing. In short, this isn't just a call to be more curious. It's a practical system for capturing, connecting, and advancing the collective intelligence of your organization. One conversation, one document, one insight at a time. If you've ever wished there was a clearer way to distinguish signal from noise, to link ideas back to real-world evidence, and to grow ideas without losing their grounding, this system is for you. An invitation to build something better. This book represents an ongoing exploration into a new way of working, one where curiosity, insight, and action are woven into the everyday life of organizations, not siloed into special projects or surface-level rituals. The frameworks and ideas introduced here are designed to be practical, but they are also emergent. This work will continue to evolve as it meets real-world complexity, real teams, and real organizational challenges. Supporting materials such as methodology playbooks, knowledge management tools, and sense-making templates are already in development. However, they will be released only after this initial approach is validated through further learning, collaboration, and refinement. The goal is not to lock in a fixed system, but to build a flexible set of practices that truly help people document and advance the knowledge that lives in their heads, the ideas, intuitions, and insights that too often go unspoken or get lost in translation. If this vision resonates with you, if you see the same gaps, feel the same frustrations, or believe there must be a better way to capture and grow shared understanding, consider this your invitation. An invitation to be part of the early movement, to help test these ideas inside your organization, or to co-create the tools and techniques that will make this way of working both scalable and sustainable. I am actively looking for collaborators, early adopters, and organizations willing to trial the framework, provide feedback, and shape what comes next. If you feel called to help, I would love to hear from you. Your experiences, your experiments, and your reflections will shape the future of this work. Because ultimately, this isn't just a book. It's the start of something bigger. A movement toward deeper knowledge, better conversations, and more grounded action. One inquisitive mind at a time. Part A innovation is not an off-site activity. At many leadership off-sites, the whiteboards fill quickly. There are sticky notes, strategy decks, and TED Talk-style videos. The atmosphere is upbeat and the language is filled with conviction. We need to think outside the box. We have to disrupt ourselves. Let's act more like a startup. Yet, when everyone returns to their desks, the walls of the organization seem to absorb the energy like acoustic foam. Initiatives are announced, innovation labs are launched, and workshops are held. But soon enough, the gravitational pull of the status quo returns. It's not that companies don't try to innovate. It's that the way they go about it often insulates the core from any real discomfort. The most well-meaning executives unintentionally turn innovation into theater, something to be performed at specific times and places, rather than embedded in the daily logic of the organization. Innovation becomes episodic, safe, a department. The rise of hackathons, corporate accelerators, and innovation labs is evidence of this tendency. These are not inherently bad ideas. In fact, they often generate useful prototypes and fresh thinking. But too frequently they serve as sandboxes that are politely ignored by the rest of the organization. They create artifacts, not impact. A McKinsey study found that while 84% of executives say innovation is important to their growth strategy, only 6% are satisfied with the outcomes of their innovation performance. Why the gap? Because it's easier to install rituals of innovation than to build a culture that actually supports it. Innovation labs, in particular, are often launched with great fanfare. They adopt the aesthetics of startups, exposed brick, sticky notes, open spaces. They hire designers, facilitators, and product managers. They run design sprints and agile rituals. But without clear integration into core business processes and decision-making structures, these labs risk becoming innovation islands, outsourced zones of creativity that rarely influence the mainland. In their 2021 review, Harvard Business School researchers noted that many labs fail because they are seen as a peripheral function with little power to shape resource allocation or strategic priorities. Design thinking emerged as one of the most influential methodologies to address the innovation gap. It provided a structured, human-centered approach that emphasized empathy, prototyping, and iteration. It was simple enough to be taught broadly and powerful enough to shift how teams framed problems. For a while, it seemed like a universal solvent. But as it scaled inside organizations, its limitations became more visible. Critics have pointed out that design thinking often leads to incremental rather than radical innovation, partly because it can overemphasize desirability over feasibility and viability. Others argue that it tends to default to a comfortable process that feels innovative without necessarily producing breakthrough results. More subtly, design thinking can fall into the trap of becoming another performance, another way to appear modern and customer-centric without challenging deeper assumptions. As Natasha Iskander wrote in the Harvard Business Review, design thinking can unintentionally reinforce the status quo when applied without critical reflection, because it reframes problems within existing organizational logics. It teaches teams to build better ladders instead of asking whether the wall is in the right place. The lean startup movement brought a sharper edge. It introduced concepts like the minimum viable product, MVP, rapid experimentation, and validated learning. It challenged teams to test hypotheses quickly and adapt based on feedback. This represented a more empirical and adaptive approach to innovation, grounded in scientific thinking. Yet in many large organizations, lean startup has struggled to take root. Its fast-paced, high-autonomy, experiment-driven model often clashes with the risk-averse, compliance-heavy structures of established enterprises. A 2022 study in the MIT Sloan Management Review found that while 70% of executives had introduced lean startup practices, less than 30% reported meaningful changes to their product development processes. The problem, again, isn't the tool, it's the context. Organizations often try to graft startup tools onto corporate soil without changing the conditions required for them to flourish. They mimic the rituals but resist the underlying shifts in power, ownership, and mindset. This leads to what some have called innovation mimicry, the superficial adoption of language and practices without the structural commitment required to sustain them. Even as organizations increasingly acknowledge the importance of innovation, they still tend to treat it as a special zone of activity, isolated from the core. It's something that happens in workshops, labs, or quarterly strategy sessions, not in how performance reviews are written, how meetings are run, or how frontline employees make decisions. This fragmented approach explains why so many well-intentioned innovation efforts fail to move the needle. What's needed is not another framework or method, but a fundamental shift in how organizations understand their own intelligence. This is where the idea of the inquisitive mind enters. It's not a toolkit, it's not a lab. It's a way of organizing attention and inquiry at every level of the system. It's a recognition that innovation is not the product of isolated genius or protected workshops, but of sustained curiosity applied in context, through conflict, uncertainty, and the constraints of real work. The future won't be shaped by organizations that have the best innovation labs or the flashiest design thinking workshops. It will be shaped by those that build cultures where questioning is safe, where learning is fast, and where insights are allowed to travel across boundaries. The organizations that thrive will not be the ones that act like startups. They'll be the ones that think like scientists. In recent years, digital transformation has become the banner under which many large organizations attempt to signal their commitment to modernization. With enormous budgets and ambitious timelines, these initiatives often start with a sense of urgency and promise. But too often they quietly fade into the background, shelved halfway through or implemented in ways that barely scratch the surface of actual change. What is most revealing isn't how many digital transformation efforts fail, but why they fail. The reasons are rarely technical. Too often, the responsibility for transformation is assigned to teams that have little influence beyond their own silos. Sometimes it's IT, sometimes it's a new digital office, or an appointed chief transformation officer who lacks true decision-making power. These individuals may be capable and sincere, but they are often handed a mission to change the organization without the cultural authority, political backing, or executive alignment necessary to succeed. When digital transformation is treated as a technology project rather than a fundamental redesign of how the organization learns, adapts, and competes, the result is a new interface built on old habits. Change management becomes a checkbox, something you do after the real work is done, to get buy-in or run some workshops for frontline employees. But change isn't a communication challenge, it's a coordination and belief challenge. It requires people to shift the way they think about their work, their value, and their role in a system that may be changing around them without clarity. In many cases, the deeper cultural conditions that make transformation possible, like psychological safety, distributed ownership, or curiosity, aren't even acknowledged. A 2023 study from CIO.com highlighted that one of the most consistent missteps in digital transformation is failing to integrate change management from the start, instead treating it as a bolt-on component to a pre-designed plan. If digital transformation is the big bang of organizational reinvention, continuous improvement is supposed to be the heartbeat, the ongoing practice of refining and elevating how things are done every day. But just like their more glamorous cousin, CI efforts are often underpowered. Many organizations have continuous improvement teams that operate in the background, disconnected from strategic decision-making, tasked with facilitating workshops and documenting process maps. Their insights rarely make it to the C-suite. Their initiatives are applauded but not prioritized. In practice, continuous improvement becomes synonymous with low-impact optimizations rather than a visible engine of innovation. As Capco notes in their 2024 analysis, companies that succeed in innovation treat CI not as a separate function, but as part of their cultural DNA. This disconnect between ambition and structure is rarely about incompetence. It's about how the organization sees itself. When leadership views innovation as a multi-year program to be delivered by someone else, whether that's the IT team, a transformation office, or a small group of lean experts, the message is clear. This is someone else's job. The signal is that risk-taking, learning, and questioning the status quo aren't expected of everyone, just a few. The failure isn't that digital transformation or continuous improvement are bad ideas. The failure is that they are routinely depoliticized, decontextualized, and detached from the real drivers of behavior: power, incentives, and culture. As Forbes reported in 2023, even organizations that do all the right steps in digital projects, adopting agile methods, deploying new platforms, or hiring external consultants, often stall because they underestimate the cultural recalibration required to absorb the change eight. When a transformation lives in PowerPoint but dies in practice, it's usually because it never confronted the way people actually think, feel, and decide. What's needed is not another change program or process method. It's a fundamental shift in mindset, one where people throughout the organization are encouraged and equipped to question, adapt, and learn as part of their everyday work. A mindset where transformation doesn't begin with a Gantt chart, but with inquiry. Where continuous improvement isn't a department, but a way of paying attention. Where innovation isn't managed, it's cultivated. An inquisitive organization doesn't ask whether it has the right digital tools. It asks whether it is learning fast enough. It doesn't ask if it is doing lean or agile or CI by the book. It asks whether the book still makes sense. This shift cannot be handed off to a task force. It must become embedded in how decisions are made, how teams are led, and how knowledge flows. When digital transformation efforts fail, and when CI teams are ignored, it is not because innovation is too hard. It is because innovation is still treated as something to be implemented, rather than something to be unleashed. The organizations that will thrive aren't the ones with the best tools or biggest budgets. They're the ones willing to confront their own habits, to lead from a place of inquiry, and to make space for a culture that continuously remakes itself. Culture is how we show what matters. Despite the widespread acclaim for innovation, many organizations struggle to embody it in their daily reality. Iconic companies like Apple, Netflix, and Airbnb are celebrated not just for their products, but for the leaps in thinking that shaped them. However, when similarly bold ideas surface within large corporations, they often face resistance or dismissal. This phenomenon was clearly articulated by Clayton Christensen in The Innovator's Dilemma, where he explains that incumbents tend to ignore or reject disruptive ideas that conflict with their existing business models or threaten their most profitable customers. At the heart of this resistance lies organizational culture, an invisible force shaping what is noticed, valued, and acted upon. Edgar Schein defines culture as a pattern of shared basic assumptions that has worked well enough to be considered valid, and therefore taught to new members as the correct way to perceive, think, and feel in relation to problems. Put simply, culture provides the lens through which employees interpret their environment and decide what behaviors are acceptable. Over time, these collective assumptions ossify into habits that favor stability and predictability over experimentation and uncertainty. Leaders frequently declare their commitment to innovation, but what they often mean is incremental, low-risk improvements that enhance existing processes or products. When a new idea threatens established hierarchies or business logic, it triggers defensive responses. People who push these ideas may be labeled troublemakers or unrealistic, and their initiatives slowly lose momentum. This dynamic creates what some call organizational antibodies, forces that protect the status quo from perceived threats, even if those threats might bring long-term benefits. This cultural inertia is why many innovation programs become performative rather than transformative. Companies launch innovation labs, hold hackathons, or send employees to design thinking workshops without addressing the underlying mindsets that drive daily decisions. These activities can create pockets of creativity, but if the broader culture punishes risk-taking or discourages questioning, the overall capacity for innovation remains limited. For the inquisitive mind framework, this insight is critical. It shifts the focus from simply adopting new tools or processes to cultivating a culture where curiosity and inquiry are deeply embedded. The challenge is not only to encourage good ideas, but to nurture the psychological safety and openness necessary for those ideas to surface and grow. Practical application means leaders must consistently model curiosity, reward questioning, and dismantle norms that suppress dissent. Only then can innovation move from episodic initiatives to a sustained organizational habit. In many organizations, the act of asking questions is far from encouraged. It is subtly discouraged. This suppression doesn't come in the form of formal policies or outright prohibitions. Rather, it operates through quiet, informal cues. The manager who sighs when someone challenges the plan, the colleague who gets sidelined for being too critical, the all-hands meeting where tough questions are screened out beforehand. All these signals teach employees what kinds of inquiries are welcome and which are dangerous. Francesca Gino's research into organizational conformity reveals that employees quickly learn to interpret these social cues and adjust their behavior accordingly. In cultures where certainty and efficiency dominate, curiosity can appear as a disruptive force, slowing down processes or questioning established expertise. Over time, this leads to self-censorship. Employees avoid raising concerns or exploring alternative viewpoints to stay within the safe zone. The consequences of this quiet sabotage are significant and often invisible. Without probing questions, flawed assumptions remain unchallenged, and projects continue on autopilot despite warning signs. This can lead to costly mistakes, missed opportunities, or products and services that don't meet real customer needs. Metrics may be manipulated to mask stagnation, creating the illusion of progress while the organization loses its ability to adapt. Consider the example of Kodak. Despite inventing the first digital camera, Kodak's leadership resisted exploring this technology fully because it threatened their profitable film business. Internally, employees who pushed digital innovation often faced subtle resistance and lack of support, leading to missed opportunities and eventual decline. This case is a stark reminder that when organizations silence questions that challenge core assumptions, they risk their very survival. For the inquisitive mind philosophy, addressing this culture of silence is paramount. Practical steps include creating forums where questions are genuinely welcomed and explored, training leaders to respond constructively to dissent, and embedding inquiry into performance metrics. Encouraging employees to voice uncertainty or curiosity without fear of negative consequences rebuilds the organization's question muscle, enabling it to navigate complexity and change more effectively. Many organizations invest heavily in engagement initiatives, employee surveys, idea boxes, pulse checks, and team building activities to spark curiosity and innovation. While these efforts often improve morale and give a voice to employees, they rarely reach the deeper cognitive level necessary to foster true inquiry. The challenge lies in what these programs measure and encourage. Employee engagement typically gauges how people feel about their work environment, leadership, and culture, but rarely probes what they notice or wonder about their work, the market, or the organization itself. As a result, engagement can create a surface level inclusivity without cultivating intellectual depth or a habit of questioning. Teresa Amabile's research on intrinsic motivation shows that creativity and innovation flourish when people find meaning and autonomy in their work. Yet, many engagement programs focus on extrinsic factors, perks, recognition, or communication styles, rather than nurturing intrinsic curiosity. Employees may feel heard, but if their questions and ideas don't lead to meaningful dialogue or change, trust erodes and engagement turns into performative theater. An example comes from a major retail company that launched a popular internal innovation platform. Employees enthusiastically submitted ideas, but leadership failed to allocate resources or respond to many proposals. Over time, participation dropped as workers learned that voicing curiosity wasn't rewarded. The engagement initiative had become a checkbox exercise, not a true lever for innovation. The inquisitive mind philosophy suggests that engagement needs to evolve from measuring sentiment to nurturing question quality. This means creating spaces where employees are encouraged to observe deeply, ask tough questions, and experiment without fear. It also requires leaders to demonstrate genuine curiosity, responding thoughtfully to input rather than simply collecting data. Practical steps to shift engagement towards inquiry include training managers to recognize and reward thoughtful questions, redesigning feedback loops to include dialogue and iteration, and integrating inquiry into daily routines, not just occasional surveys. When curiosity is part of how people engage, the organization unlocks new potential for learning and innovation. Organizations often turn to established frameworks to solve complex problems, hoping these methods will provide structure and repeatable results. Frameworks like design thinking, Lean Startup, Agile, or Six Sigma offer appealing step-by-step processes that promise innovation, efficiency, or transformation. But relying too heavily on any framework risks substituting genuine thinking with formulaic execution. Frameworks can become rigid scripts that limit curiosity rather than spark it. When teams focus on checking the boxes, completing each stage, filling out templates, running workshops, they may stop questioning the fundamental assumptions beneath the problem. Natasha Iskander highlights that superficial application of design thinking, for example, often bypasses deep contextual inquiry, leading to shallow solutions that fail to address core challenges. This pattern extends beyond design thinking to many frameworks. Lean Startup's Build, Measure, Learn loop offers agility and experimentation, but assumes psychological safety and autonomy that many organizations don't yet provide. In rigid corporate contexts, lean tools may become additional processes layered on top of existing bureaucracy, causing frustration rather than enabling true learning. Similarly, agile ceremonies can become routine rituals rather than forums for reflective thinking. A telling example comes from a Fortune 500 company that adopted multiple innovation frameworks simultaneously. Teams were inundated with training on design thinking, lean startup, and agile, but found themselves navigating conflicting processes and unclear decision rights. The frameworks created busy work that crowded out the time and mental space needed for genuine inquiry. Employees reported feeling stuck between frameworks rather than empowered to challenge assumptions and experiment freely. The inquisitive mind approach warns against framework fetishism. Tools and methods are valuable, but they must be in service of how people think, not the other way around. Inquiry is a habit of noticing what others overlook, asking hard questions, and holding space for uncertainty. Practically, this means leaders should resist mandates for framework adoption as an end goal. Instead, they can foster environments where frameworks serve as flexible guides, tools to support reflection, not prescriptions that shut down curiosity. Teams should be encouraged to adapt, question, or even discard frameworks when they impede insight. By emphasizing mindset over method, the inquisitive mind philosophy helps organizations avoid the trap of replacing thinking with frameworks. It nurtures the skill to think critically and creatively within any approach, driving sustained innovation beyond the latest trend. Change initiatives are a staple in organizations aiming to adapt and innovate. Whether called digital transformation, agile adoption, or culture change programs, these efforts consume vast resources and attention. Yet, the statistics are clear. Roughly 70% of change initiatives fail to deliver lasting impact. One reason is the common approach to change as a project rather than a shift in how people think and behave. Organizations often launch change initiatives with detailed plans, roadmaps, and top-down mandates, expecting people to follow new rules or adopt new tools. But change at this scale demands more than compliance. It requires a fundamental shift in mindset and daily practice. Too often, leaders underestimate the deep cultural assumptions underpinning behavior. The inquisitive mind framework highlights that change falters when organizations don't challenge the mental models that shape how employees perceive problems and solutions. Without questioning these assumptions, old habits persist under new labels. Consider digital transformation efforts. Companies invest heavily in technology upgrades, but the human side of transformation, how people interpret data, collaborate, or make decisions, is frequently overlooked. For example, a multinational company's rollout of advanced analytics tools failed to gain traction because employees did not trust or understand the new data sources. The initiative focused on the what, tools, but neglected the how, mindsets and skills needed to use them effectively. Similarly, change management often reduces to communication plans and training sessions, necessary but insufficient. Real change requires ongoing reflection and dialogue. People need space to ask questions like, why are we changing this process? What assumptions does it rely on? What could we do differently? Without fostering these inquiries, change remains superficial. Another challenge is leadership's role. Change initiatives typically depend on visible sponsorship, but leaders may lack the time, tools, or genuine conviction to sustain cultural shifts. The inquisitive mind philosophy encourages leaders to model curiosity openly, to ask questions, admit what they don't know, and invite experimentation. This sets the tone for the whole organization. Finally, change initiatives fail when they are isolated from daily work. Programs in separate change teams or consultants' hands struggle to embed new ways of thinking into everyday decisions. Successful transformation integrates inquiry into regular workflows, meetings, and metrics. In practice, leaders should focus on creating conditions where inquiry flourishes during change, psychological safety to voice doubts, decentralized decision-making, and feedback loops that surface learning. This approach aligns with inquisitive mind principles. Change is less a destination and more an ongoing practice of questioning and adaptation. Digital transformation has become the emblem of modern business reinvention. Organizations pour resources into new technologies, restructure teams, and appoint chief transformation officers, aiming to keep pace with rapidly shifting markets. Yet, despite these efforts, studies consistently find that up to 70% of digital transformation initiatives fail to meet their objectives. This high failure rate points to a fundamental problem. Transformation efforts often focus on surface-level changes, new systems, new processes, new titles, without addressing the deeper cognitive shifts needed for lasting change. At its core,